Joining me in the studio at this point is a consultant public health physician, regular here, Dr. Alera Roberts. Thank you so much once again for coming in.
And thank you for having me.
The key subject of discussion today is the issue of social distancing becoming physical distancing. Now, a lot of people are confused because when we all started this, we were told social distancing. But then we were told that, yes, that meant staying some distance away from other people, but it didn't mean disconnecting from family members and so on. Then when it became physical distancing, some said it was a bit clearer, some said it wasn't. One thing everybody seems to agree on is that we are not finding it easy to do.
No, we're not. As a people, I mean, let's face it, under normal circumstances, you and I would not be sitting this far apart. But do that. Just stretch out your, there you go. That is what we call physical distancing. So we're in the same room, we are connecting, we're talking, we're having a chat, but we're physically distant from each other because the science has shown us the distance that the droplets can spread when you're talking, coughing, sneezing, different things that one is doing. But what has also come to light is the fact that as families and friends, we do need to be connected because the human being is by nature a very social person. Well, we live in large social groups, and that has been the essence of that's what defines us as a species on the earth. So, you know, even if we have to be physically distant, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from calling your mom, and now thanks to all these new technologies, not Skype, I must confess, you know, WebEx and Zoom and FaceTime, we can actually keep in touch with members of the family. And many of us who have family members in different parts of the world actually do so. Not quite the same thing, but certainly a lot better than not connecting at all. And that way, we are also able to pass on the right information. So I think it's purely semantics, perhaps, but I think it's the right thing for WHO to come out and say, actually, what we're talking about here is physical distancing. And Ladi, you will recall that when the lockdown was lifted, we saw crowds of people.
That's right.
I mean, we do need that physical distance in between if we're to halt the spread of this disease.
Which brings me to what you started off with, that we are by nature like that. And so you find that even when we start by observing it, certain situations then arise where you find that people tend to forget and they go back into this. So it's going to take some time.
It will take some time.
And there are those who are pointing out that it's going to be with us. This is not something that is hanging around only for a couple of weeks and that along with the lockdown, it will go away.
Very correct.
Which means it will affect interactions.
Absolutely. And don't forget that we've been having this discussion on and off, that how do we live not in a post-COVID Nigeria, but in a post-lockdown Nigeria. There's a big difference between, because we do accept that the COVID is going to be with us for a while. And we've talked about the game changers, the ability to do much for rapid testing. We've talked about the possibility of a vaccine. And these are things that will change the outlook as time goes on. But it is still a process of time. So, you know, there are some tough habits where, look at me, I'm still clasping my hands to stop me from rubbing my eyes and tickling my nose. You know, there are some habits that we're just going to have to form. And I think the physical distancing and how it translates, particularly those of us in the southwest of Nigeria who are extremely social, and you know what I'm talking about. There are things that we're going to have to live with in order to slow down the spread of this virus.
Correct me if this is wrong. I mean, that's why I'm asking. There are those who point out that that connection in terms of social interaction between people also helps them health-wise, particularly those who, it turns out, are the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
With this. That so the staying away from them tends to give the wrong idea.
Absolutely. And considering that I have an almost 90-year-old father sitting in my house who cannot go to his favorite club on a certain day of the week, and they're all getting really agitated. For the older folk, it is particularly hard because they've really known no other means of communal living than actually being in touch with people and getting a hug from the grandchildren and tapping the shoulder and sitting side by side with your girlfriend of several decades to have a good natter. So that is being particularly hard on the old folk. And as they grow older and their immediate society shrinks by virtue of death and whatnot, this is particularly hard on them. And it's something we're really looking for solutions to it. So how do we continue with the inclusion without putting them at greater risk? Definitely one of the things we're going to be looking at is this growing herd immunity, which we cannot prove until we have far more widespread testing, but which we know is going to happen. So again, we're talking about a process of time where, you know, if we can keep people exposed to very small amounts of the virus, their body can kick in with immune responses so that eventually we can get back to being together, but certainly not in the immediate future.
Staying with this social or physical distancing thing. Now, if you say, I mean, you've got to stay physically away, there are some people for whom the economics make it impossible.
Absolutely.
In our own environment, you have people who live 10 in 2 rooms and so on. And this situation hasn't changed that living arrangement. So they are more or less compelled to continue. How best do you think they can tackle this, given the fact that they can't stretch their hands in those 2 rooms and nobody will touch?
Absolutely. And this is where the hygiene and sanitation now comes in. We need to have improved water supply. We need to have improved sanitation and hygienic practices. This thing we say hand washing with soap and running water. However you want to do, I've seen some very ingenious and innovative solutions to providing this. We have to keep reminding people, wash your hands constantly under running water with soap for at least 20 seconds. It's so important because that is the only way the virus can actually enter the human body. It enters through the mucous membranes, which are in the mouth, the nose, the eyes.
Right.
You know, so the virus being on my hands, as it is, will not infect me. Where it is going to infect me is when I now take my hand and start rubbing my eyes or picking my nose or taking bits of food out of my teeth without washing my hands. Now, I will not remember to not touch, but I must remember to constantly wash hands or use a sanitizer in between. So, and then wiping the horizontal surfaces constantly with a mild solution of hypochlorite bleach, household bleach. So constant wiping means that even as I'm breathing and talking and maybe even dropping the virus, it's constantly being wiped away so that we lower the amount of viral load in the community. I know it's not going to be to 0, but by so much that transmission becomes all the more difficult.
As a final takeaway, for those struggling with this, what would you tell them?
That is becoming increasingly more difficult because we're repeating the same things over and over and over again. It's still the hand washing. It's still the use of an alcohol sanitizer if you can't get to a hand washing facility. It's still the, now I'll call it physical distancing, maintaining 6 feet between you and the next person. It's still avoiding the crowded spaces. It is still about sanitizing the horizontal surfaces and high-touch areas constantly, regularly, same message over and over again. It is still about avoiding crowds. And I have to make a comment about the banking situation. I do think it is actually quite deplorable. And I thought it quite sad that one of the top banks that we noticed on the television screen that had the huge crowd underneath, and they have not been able to perfect the internet and online banking and insisting that all their customers use it, because that is just making nonsense of everything we're trying to say. If we're talking about the buses, considering that for 7 weeks, they were not able to make any income, and to now restrict them to a 60% capacity when they're trying to make up the differential. When they're trying to make up the differential, who is supposed to pay for that differential? So some of these rules and regulations really boils down to us taking collective responsibility for our health by keeping to these simple rules, so that the faster we stop the transmission, the sooner we can get back to our new normal.
Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for being here this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.